Jimmy Kimmel delivered a punchline on national television, expecting his usual laughs, but Jasmine Crockett's measured response left him without words, and the studio audience completely silent. The recording equipment was already capturing everything when Jasmine Crockett walked onto that stage, not a moment of uncertainty in her stride. Black pumps, jade blazer, natural hair pulled back into a sleek updo that stayed perfectly in place. She greeted Jimmy Kimmel with a firm handshake, offered a professional smile, and settled into her seat opposite him, while the audience applauded with that typical late-night show enthusiasm, part genuine excitement, part practiced routine.
Jimmy settled back into his chair, wearing that familiar smirk he always displayed when a politician appeared on his show.
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, everyone, he announced. The powerhouse from Dallas. Or perhaps I should say, the unstoppable filibuster force. Jasmine released a brief chuckle, though you could already sense she had encountered these characterizations countless times before. "You can call me Jasmine," she responded, her voice smooth and controlled like honey drizzled over warm bread. "But I'm nobody's powerhouse." The audience responded with laughter, though it was the type of laughter people produce when they're uncertain who's actually making the joke.
The opening minutes progressed like any standard late-night appearance. Jimmy made light of Congress, the current political climate, the theatrical drama within the Capitol building. Jasmine handled it gracefully, delivered some rehearsed responses, inserted a few clever comebacks of her own. Then, Jimmy retrieved a note card and shifted the atmosphere. "So Jasmine," he began, leaning forward with a grin, "you're famous for being, how should I phrase this, somewhat fiery. Is that a calculated approach, or do you simply wake up prepared to battle every single day?"
Several audience members released small laughs. Jasmine angled her head slightly, examining him. Jimmy continued forward.
"I mean, it's almost like you're trying out for a reality show spin-off, The Capitol Wives of Washington, D.C. The room responded with louder laughter this time, though there was a noticeable pause just before it began, the type that lingers for a moment too long. Jasmine didn't laugh. She lifted the water glass from the side table, took a measured sip, and placed it back down. "I'll respond to that," she stated, "but allow me to ask you something first." Jimmy lifted his eyebrows. "Sure." "Do you ever grow weary of white men labeling you fiery, simply because you won't allow them to speak over you?" The room fell completely silent. Not the awkward quiet of a failed joke. This was something entirely different. Eyes opened wider, several people released that automatic, "oh," sound that emerges when a statement cuts too deeply to dismiss. Jimmy shifted back in his seat, blinking repeatedly. For the first time during the interview, he didn't have an immediate comeback prepared. Jasmine didn't smile, she didn't blink, she simply observed him, calm and composed, like she was accustomed to these types of moments. There was something present in the atmosphere now. Not exactly tension, but rather intense attention. Every individual in that studio, including those barely paying attention while scrolling their phones, was now completely focused. Jimmy released a nervous laugh, attempting to redirect the energy. "All right, I stepped right into that one." "No," she responded. "You sprinted." Yet the audience wasn't laughing the same way anymore, and neither was Jimmy. Jimmy tapped his note cards against the desk surface, a nervous habit he always displayed when he needed a moment to regroup. But this time it wasn't merely nerves. He appeared to be attempting to determine where the tracks had disappeared, because the train had completely derailed. "Well," he said, glancing downward, "this interview is already significantly more compelling than the one we conducted with the person who writes fortune cookie messages." A handful of polite chuckles emerged. Jasmine crossed her legs and clasped her hands neatly in her lap. She didn't utter a word. She didn't need to. Jimmy pressed forward, likely hoping to regain control of the situation. "You've been extremely vocal about, well, essentially everything. Some individuals say you're courageous, others say you're hostile. What would you call it?" Jasmine looked directly at him. "Honest." Jimmy opened his mouth but produced no sound. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The tension wasn't dramatic or explosive, it was the quiet type, like everyone understood this conversation had ceased being a performance several minutes ago. "Well, certainly. Honest is positive," Jimmy said, laughing somewhat too forcefully. "But I mean, you have engaged in some fairly intense confrontations, correct? Do you ever pose that question to Senator Kennedy?" She replied steadily. "Or is being intense only problematic when it's a woman?" Jimmy blinked repeatedly, his smile wavering just perceptibly. I believe we have a clip, actually," he attempted. "No," she interrupted, voice still perfectly composed. Don't show a clip of me unless you're showing clips of everyone else losing their composure. Otherwise, you're not presenting the truth, you're marketing a narrative. The crowd murmured. Someone toward the back even applauded, but ceased when nobody else joined. Jimmy cleared his throat. Look, Jasmine, I wasn't attempting to— I know, she said, softening just marginally. But you are. That's the issue. It's embedded in how this entire system operates. I appear here as myself, unfiltered, authentic, genuine, and the first description I receive is fiery. Jimmy appeared like he wanted to respond, but Jasmine leaned forward just enough for the camera to capture her complete expression.
When you say that, what you're actually communicating is, you don't behave like the individuals we're accustomed to watching on this couch. But perhaps that's not my issue. Perhaps that's yours. The silence that followed was different than before, weightier even. The band, always prepared with a rim shot or background accent, remained completely quiet. Jimmy looked down again, nodding slowly, genuinely this time. Fair point, he acknowledged. Jasmine leaned back. That's all I wanted. And for several seconds, that was it. No laughter, no scripted jokes, just two individuals sitting opposite each other, before several million viewers in a moment that didn't feel rehearsed or produced. It felt authentic and somewhat too uncomfortable for comfort. But Jimmy wasn't about to allow the segment to conclude on a low note. All right, he said, displaying a grin that was only partially effective. Let's discuss something lighter. You brought your dog, correct? I heard he urinated on Capitol property and generated headlines. The audience laughed. The tension cracked just slightly. Jasmine offered a small smirk. He possesses better judgment than some of my colleagues. That generated genuine laughter, not forced, not polite, but the type people release when they're grateful for an opportunity to breathe again. Yet even though the tone shifted, the moment hadn't dissipated. Something had transformed and everyone could sense it. The cameras continued recording, but the room hadn't completely reset. Jimmy relied on humor to redirect things, but his timing was off. You could observe he recognized it too. Jasmine, conversely, appeared entirely composed, like she'd occupied this chair previously, even if she hadn't. So, Jimmy, he said, reorganizing the next card in his hand, we've discussed politics. You've corrected me multiple times. I believe I'm still recovering. But let's discuss your future. Congresswoman today, but what about tomorrow? Senate, White House, Netflix documentary? That final element was intended as humor. It landed awkwardly.
Jasmine chuckled, but there was something sharp beneath her smile.
Interesting thing about the future, she stated. Everyone believes they understand yours better than you do.
Jimmy paused. Meaning?
I mean, every time I enter space like this, somebody attempts to write my narrative for me before I've even completed a sentence. People prefer to skip to the conclusion when it's someone like me.
He raised an eyebrow. Someone like you?
Black, female, loud when I need to be, quiet when it makes them uncomfortable, intelligent enough to make certain folks feel like they must prove something.
A hush settled over the audience again. Not forced, just natural. Like they were attempting to follow something that didn't arrive with a laugh track.
Jimmy tried again.
You've had several viral moments already. That exchange with the Oversight Committee, the press conference where you silenced that reporter from Dallas. I suppose what I'm wondering is, do you want to be perceived this way, as someone who responds sharply? Jasmine leaned in, finally prepared to deliver it.
Jimmy, when you mature being instructed to be twice as effective and still get discussed like you're twice as challenging, you learn to select your words. So if I provide you one sentence that manages to penetrate the noise, trust me, it's not about becoming viral. It's about being acknowledged.
That sentence lingered in the air like a judge's gavel. You could observe Jimmy's eyes widen just perceptibly. Not in offense, but in recognition. Like someone who just received information they believe they comprehended, but didn't truly grasp until now. The audience didn't applaud immediately. They didn't need to. Everyone was observing her, and it wasn't merely admiration. It was something more profound. It was respect.
I'm not attempting to become anybody's meme, she added, but if one sentence can make individuals pause and consider, even for a moment, then perhaps I expressed what needed expression. Jimmy didn't respond immediately. He turned his note card face down on the desk surface. Well, he said, voice lower now, you expressed it. There was a beat. Then someone, toward the back, possibly one of the camera operators, clapped once. Several others joined. Then it caught like a flame. Applause swelled. Not a standing ovation, not yet, but it was sufficient to transform the room.
Jimmy turned toward the camera, breaking format. We'll return shortly, he said, appearing somewhat more contemplative than he had 15 minutes earlier.
The screen transitioned to commercial. Behind the scenes, nobody moved for several seconds. The crew whispered among themselves. A producer waved someone over wearing a headset. Jimmy sat quietly in his chair, blinking, lips pressed into a tight line, like he was replaying the previous 7 minutes in his mind. Jasmine? She reached for her water again, calm, centered, like she hadn't just transformed a late-night studio completely with a handful of sentences. But if that moment on stage had altered the tone, what occurred afterward would transform everything far beyond that studio.
When they returned from commercial, the atmosphere felt different. Not awkward, just uncertain. The audience applauded as instructed, but it didn't possess the same energy it had earlier. Some individuals appeared like they weren't certain whether they were viewing a late-night program or something else entirely. Jimmy attempted to reset things. "We're back with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who just casually handed me my own program on a silver platter," he said, chuckling. It was a decent line. He smiled broadly, clearly hoping for an easy laugh. Jasmine offered a polite smirk. "Just performing my civic responsibility." More laughter this time, relief even, but something had transformed between them. You could observe it in how Jimmy sat up straighter now, didn't lean in quite the same. He wasn't frightened, just aware. Aware that he'd entered into a moment that had become larger than both of them.
"So tell me," he continued, voice lighter now, "what's something individuals get incorrect about you constantly?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "That I arrived here to play nice." That generated genuine laughter, not because it was humorous, but because it was truthful. And when individuals state something that truthful on television, the reaction is never solely about the joke. It's about the release. Jimmy nodded. "Fair enough. And I'll state this. I may not agree with everything you express, but I definitely wouldn't want to debate you without backup and for assistance." Now that landed. The crowd roared. Jasmine even laughed genuinely this time. It was the first complete laugh she'd provided since the interview began, and it dissolved some of the remaining tension in the room.
They spent the subsequent several minutes discussing community work, her district in Dallas, the legislation she'd been advocating to pass regarding expanding mental health resources for underserved communities. It wasn't superficial, but it was safer territory, the type of content that got extracted for social media, but wouldn't get anyone terminated. Still, you could sense it. Beneath every sentence was a ripple. Everyone in the studio still circling back to that exchange from earlier. You couldn't unhear it. You couldn't pretend it hadn't occurred. During the final moments of the interview, Jimmy reached for something he rarely displayed: genuine appreciation. "Look, Jasmine," he said, "whatever individuals think of politics, I believe what's evident is you're not afraid to be precisely who you are. And I respect that, even when it frightens me slightly." Jasmine didn't miss a beat. Growth begins at discomfort. He chuckled. I'll be quoting that for 2 weeks. As they stood to shake hands for the farewell, something unexpected occurred. The audience stood. Not a planned standing ovation, no cue, no signal from the stage manager. They simply rose, one by one, some applauding, several with hands covering their mouths, others recording on their phones. Jimmy seemed somewhat thrown by it. Jasmine appeared almost entertained. "Thank you all," she said into the microphone before departing the stage. The credits rolled over a wide shot of the audience still on their feet. The band began playing, but their music felt quieter somehow, like it didn't want to interrupt whatever had just transpired. Backstage, a different type of chaos was beginning to ripple. Several producers whispered behind a curtain. A makeup artist kept checking her phone, eyes wide. A young staffer wearing a headset whispered, "We're trending already." Jimmy stood near the monitor, watching the playback. He wasn't speaking, just staring at the moment she asked him.
"Do you ever grow weary of white men labeling you fiery?"
He turned toward the executive producer. "You believe I went too far?" The producer didn't respond immediately.
"I believe you provoked someone who's accustomed to fighting battles with a microphone in one hand and her dignity in the other."
Jimmy sighed.
"Yeah, and I was holding cue cards."
But while Jimmy attempted to process what had just occurred inside that studio, the outside world was already reacting, and rapidly. By the time Jimmy had completed his post-show wrap-up and Jasmine's vehicle pulled away from the studio lot, the internet was already ablaze. The clip reached X, formerly Twitter, within 18 minutes. A blurry phone video from an audience member with the caption, "She didn't even elevate her voice. Jasmine Crockett just dismantled Kimmel in real time." That post had over 280,000 views in under 50 minutes. Then arrived the TikToks. Edits with dramatic background music, side-by-side reactions. A user named @PoliticoBaddie posted, "I viewed this 14 times. The way she stated, perhaps that's not my issue, perhaps that's yours. That's going to occupy space in my brain forever." The comment section exploded. Half the internet was celebrating, the other half arguing. Finally, someone addressed him without shouting. "Why invite strong women on your program if you're going to address them like caricatures? It was humor, get over it." He received what he earned. The segment reached YouTube by 11:30 p.m. Not through the official channel, but some bootleg screen recording that someone had enhanced and subtitled. 12 hours later, it was the #1 trending video across the platform. By morning, it wasn't solely politics enthusiasts or comedy fans discussing it. It had reached the group chats, the Facebook feeds, the morning coffee crowd. On The View, Ana Navarro stated, "I've been in green rooms with Jasmine Crockett. That woman is not here to play checkers." ESPN's Stephen A. Smith mentioned it on his podcast. Was it a political moment? Perhaps, but what I observed was someone receive a verbal elbow and return it immediately without even rising from the chair. And even local radio stations in places like Phoenix and Sacramento were mentioning it between traffic reports. But not all the attention was positive. A handful of conservative commentators seized onto the moment like it was a threat. Another angry Democrat woman throwing a tantrum on live television. They attempted to frame it as unprofessional, inappropriate, disrespectful. But Jasmine had stated nothing disrespectful. She hadn't elevated her voice, she hadn't called names, she hadn't even altered her tone. And that's what made it powerful. She allowed the words to perform the lifting.
And the silence afterward was what individuals couldn't cease discussing.
The way Jimmy didn't understand what to say. The way the audience transitioned from laughing to contemplating. The way the atmosphere transformed on live television with just several sentences. By midday, major media outlets were contacting her team for comment. CNN, MSNBC, NPR, even 60 Minutes left a message inquiring if she'd be available for a sit-down. Her communications director, a lean guy named Andre, simply shook his head as the requests accumulated. "Do we even respond?" someone inquired. Jasmine looked up from her phone. "We don't need to. Not even a tweet." She smiled. "Allow them to continue talking. I already expressed what I needed to express." That became its own headline. Jasmine Crockett responds to viral interview. "I already expressed what I needed to express." Support arrived from corners of the internet that rarely agreed on anything. Young activists praised her clarity. Older voters appreciated her restraint. Even several celebrities contributed. Ava DuVernay called her unshakable. Kerry Washington reposted the clip with a single word: respect. Jimmy Kimmel's camp eventually released a quiet statement through a spokesperson. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a defense either. Just several lines stating he appreciated Jasmine's candor and believed in honest, challenging conversations. Some individuals called it weak, others called it sufficient. But while the internet buzzed and dissected the moment from every angle, the deeper narrative was still waiting to be revealed. The one about why that sentence mattered so significantly in the first place. Before the memes and headlines, before late-night applause and awkward laughter, there was a girl in East Dallas seated at the rear of a classroom, raising her hand too frequently. Jasmine Crockett was that student, the one who always possessed a question the teacher didn't want to address, the one who got labeled challenging when she inquired why the school library contained outdated books, or why nobody ever instructed them about individuals who resembled her. Her mother worked nights as a nurse at Presbyterian Dallas Medical Center. Her father operated a small automotive shop that never seemed to close. They didn't possess much, but they possessed enough for Jasmine to feel secure, to feel acknowledged. What they didn't possess was time. So Jasmine learned how to maintain her position early. She wasn't loud, at least not initially, but she was precise. If you attempted to place her in a box, she'd inquire who constructed it and why it only possessed space for one type of voice. In college at Prairie View A&M, she studied political science and acquired a second position at the campus help desk. She spent her weekends in debate halls, frequently competing against individuals with more wealth, more refinement, and more connections. But she possessed fire, and not the type that extinguished quickly. The type that remained low and steady, always glowing, never demanding to be noticed. Law school refined her edges. Working in public defense exposed her to the type of injustice that didn't arrive with hashtags or headlines.
She sat opposite mothers, pleading for assistance in courtrooms that didn't even pretend to listen. She composed motions late into the night while her refrigerator hummed in a one-bedroom apartment near Cedar Hill. Every time she spoke in court, someone labeled her aggressive. Every time she raised a point, someone stated she was too passionate. Every time she stood up, someone cautioned her she'd advance further if she simply smiled more. She maintained receipts, not solely of the words, but of how they made her feel.
How every label attempted to diminish her, compress her into something that could be dismissed.
So when Jimmy Kimmel labeled her fiery, it wasn't about that single moment. It was about a lifetime of coded language. It was about hearing the identical tone in different mouths. It was about the years she spent learning how to state, no, not this time. And that's why her sentence, perhaps that's not my issue, perhaps that's yours, struck like it did. Because for so long, the burden was on individuals like her to adjust, to smooth things over, to comprehend the context. But Jasmine had reached a point where she wasn't interested in adjusting. She was more interested in accuracy and grace and understanding that you can correct someone without humiliating them.
That's why the audience respected her. That's why the clip resonated. It wasn't a gotcha. It wasn't rage. It was control. The type that's earned from years of observing others narrate your story for you. And it reminded individuals, particularly women of color, that you don't need to perform softness to deserve respect. You don't need to dilute your words to make individuals comfortable. You can be clear, you can be calm, and you can still transform a room with a sentence. Andre, her communications guy, expressed it best in a text to a friend the night the clip exploded. She didn't arrive here to trend. She arrived here to remind individuals why they listen in the first place. And that's what remained. Not the tension, not the jokes, not even the applause, just the truth. But as the headlines began to quiet down, one final moment brought everything full circle, and it occurred when nobody was observing. It occurred 3 days later. No cameras, no audience, just a quiet corridor backstage at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood. Jimmy Kimmel was back on set, preparing for that evening's taping. Crew members moved around, preparing lights, adjusting sound levels, reviewing the run sheet. The world had primarily moved on to the next viral moment, but something was still lingering over the studio. Jasmine Crockett had returned, not as a guest, but for a closed-door meeting with one of the producers regarding a community initiative she'd been advocating involving media literacy and political education in underserved schools. She didn't plan to encounter Jimmy, but as fate or coincidence would have it, they crossed paths in the corridor near the dressing rooms.
He observed her first. For a moment he hesitated, and then he stepped forward.
Hey,
He said. His voice was quiet. Jasmine looked at him. Not cold, not surprised, just present.
hey.
He paused. You could observe he was considering carefully. Not because he wanted to state the correct thing, but because he didn't want to waste her time.
I've been contemplating what you stated that night.
He added. Jasmine provided a small nod.
I believe I became comfortable.
He continued.
Too comfortable. Forgot that being humorous doesn't excuse being careless.
She tilted her head.
You're not the first. You won't be the last. I understand.
He said.
But I don't want to be either of those things.
A beat of silence. Then Jasmine softened just perceptibly. Then don't be. Jimmy exhaled, like someone had been holding his breath for him. Thank you for not destroying me, he said. Jasmine smirked. I don't destroy. I clarify. He laughed, genuinely laughed this time. The corridor, the lights, even the weight of the moment, they all felt lighter now. That small exchange didn't generate headlines. Nobody captured it on a phone. There were no applause breaks, no edits with dramatic music. But it mattered, because growth, the genuine type, doesn't always arrive with a camera directed at it. Sometimes, it's simply two individuals meeting in the middle. Without performance or pressure, just honesty.
Later that week, Jasmine delivered a talk at a high school in Oklahoma City. One student raised her hand and inquired, "How do you remain calm when individuals attempt to make you small?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "You don't provide them the power to define you," she stated. "And you remember there's nothing louder than grace." That line appeared in a school newsletter. A teacher printed it out and posted it to the wall. And perhaps that's the lesson in all of this. Sometimes maintaining your position doesn't appear like shouting. It appears like understanding precisely who you are when someone attempts to reduce you to a soundbite. It appears like allowing your words to carry weight, not because you yell, but because you mean them. Jasmine didn't win an argument that night on Kimmel's program. She didn't destroy anyone. What she performed was hold space for herself, for every woman who's ever been dismissed, for every young individual who's ever been instructed to tone it down, for every person who's ever been labeled before they've had the opportunity to speak. And in performing so, she reminded us all, you don't need to shrink to be observed. You don't need to respond sharply to be clear. You don't need to fight dirty to earn respect. Sometimes one well-positioned sentence can transform a room more than any performance ever could. And if you experienced something while listening to this narrative, if it made you pause or reflect, then don't maintain it to yourself. Share it, speak up, and hit that subscribe button. Because narratives like these, they're not simply entertainment. They're reminders, and we require more of them.